Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Shelby?
Maybe
Yes,
just a touch louder, Whitney.
Yeah, just a touch.
On the volume here. Okay, is that better?
Just a little bit.
Okay. Can we move the microphone closer? Yeah. Hang on to it. Okay, hold on. We're going to move the microphone. Can you just push the whole part? All right. Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, we moved the microphone a little bit closer, so getting used to all this technology. Well, I want to welcome you to the Flavors from the Field session. This is a cook-along session, or you can just watch and you can make it later. The recipes are on the website, so you can download the handouts from there to use for later on. So what we're going to make today is actually a pecan crusted pork tenderloin with a pear relish. So when we talk about flavors from the field, we talk about all the things that come from the field, vegetables, legumes, and orchards that give us all kinds of fruits. And from those things, we can make relishes, we can make salsas, and we can make chutneys. And those are great items, great condiments to really enhance meals. So you can take a plain chicken breast and you can go from plain chicken to a fancy dinner that you can use for entertaining. And so we're going to get started with our cooking. So the first thing we're going to make is our pear relish. So I have a saucepan here, and we're going to go ahead and turn the burner on, and that is the left front. So let's get this heating up, and we're going to make a relish that uses pears in it. Okay, so we're going to start with apple cider vinegar. Most relishes and chutneys have vinegar in them, and so we're going to use a liquid measuring cup. Liquid measuring cups have a spout on them. So we need half a cup. And we're going to pour that into our pan. We want to get a flavorful liquid started before we add all of our other ingredients like our onions and our peppers and our pears. So we want to get this flavored up here. So we're also going to add 2 tablespoons. So I have half a cup plus 2 tablespoons of cider vinegar. And I'm going to turn my heat up to probably a medium high. We want to get this starting to boil almost. And then we're going to turn it down and we're going to simmer it for a little while. So we've got our half a cup plus 2 tablespoons of cider vinegar. Now we're going to add a half a cup of sugar. Most chutneys and some of the relishes have sugar in them. Most of the salsas do not. So we added half a cup of sugar, and that's going to make kind of a syrupy liquid that's really good with our pears. And pork is a great item to go with fruit and sweet seasonings. Okay, I'm going to put this down. Now, we need to flavor this liquid. So we're going to do that with some pickling spice. So we're going to take 3/4 of a teaspoon of pickling spice. And you can just kind of eyeball this. I use a measuring spoon, but if you get a little extra in there, that is no problem at all. But pickling spice has all kinds of good things. It has bay leaf in it. It has peppercorns in it. It has mustard seeds a lot of the time and cloves. And so you get all of those flavors into your liquid without having to add a whole bunch of other spices. But we are going to add a couple of other things to it. So we have ground ginger. Now you can use ground ginger or you can use turmeric. I put ground ginger in the recipe because that's something that most people have at home and not everybody has turmeric. Turmeric is what they use to make mustard yellow They use it a lot in pickles and that kind of stuff. And it has kind of an earthy flavor to it. But so you can use either one. If you have turmeric, you can use that. I've made it with turmeric before, but we're going to use ginger today. And so we're just using a ground ginger. And my liquid's coming up to a boil here. I don't know if you can hear it. And then we're going to add 1/4 teaspoon of paprika. Going to give it a little bit of color, a little bit of flavor. And we're going to add 3/4 teaspoon of salt. So I'm using kosher salt. And we're going to add that to our pot. Okay. We're going to bring you in for a closer look here. So here's all of my liquid. You can see up a little bit down. Oh, I'm sorry, down. There we go. You can see the paprika's colored it a little bit. It's got all those spices in there. So we want that to simmer and cook down. When we add our pears, it's going to add a lot of liquid to it. So we want this almost to be syrupy and let it cook. So I'm going to put it so it boils. And in the meantime, we're going to chop up our vegetables. Always when we start cooking, I did wash my hands right before we started. Clean hands are one of your best tools. So make sure you wash those. I did wash all of my produce as well. So my pepper's all washed. My onion is all washed and it's ready to go. I peeled all the skin off of it. And so we're going to start with our onion, and we want to have half an onion that we're going to put into our relish. Almost all relishes and chutneys and salsas, all three of those have some kind of onion. Might be a sweet onion like I'm using today. You could certainly use a white onion or a yellow onion or a purple onion. It doesn't really matter. Some of them contain even like green onions or shallots, which have a milder flavor. So the sweet onions, though, are really good with the pears, and so that's what I got for today. So we're going to use a large chef knife in order to cut this up, and really important that you have sharp knives. So make sure that those are sharpened and ready to go. Always a problem when we have something that is round and we're trying to chop it. So after I peel my onion, I always cut it in half from top to bottom. So I lay it on the flat side where I peeled it, and I'm going to cut from the top down to the bottom and cut that onion in half. And what that does is it gives me a nice flat edge so that I can lay it down on my cutting board and have it be safe. There's nothing worse than trying to cut an onion and it's rolling around on you and you're trying to hold it steady. That's really dangerous. And I know it makes nice slices, like if you're doing onions for a hamburger or something like that, but it's really dangerous to do that. So I always cut mine in half. If I'm going to put it on a hamburger or something, I can still get half moons out of it, and that will work just fine. So we need about a half an onion finely chopped here. So I'm going to take one of my halves, and I'm going to keep my hand flat, and I'm going to put it on the top, keeping my fingers out of the way, and I'm going to put a couple of slices horizontally into my onion. I'm not cutting all the way through so that the slices pretty much stay together. I want them to stay in a stack there. Then I'm going to go vertically. So Jacinia, you want to come zoom in? So I'm going to hold it together, and I'm just going to make slices vertically. Keeping my fingers out of the way. Now I can curl my fingers back. So I call it the claw. Make sure that your fingers are back. And you're going to hold it with that, and then you're going to slice down. This is where if you have a really dull knife, it's going to be really hard to do this, and these are going to slide all over the place. a really sharp knife will cut all the way through that. Okay, when I get down to a little bit, it gets a little tippy, so I'm going to lay it down. And then I'm going to chop it the other direction. And that gives me half of an onion. Now, if I want this a little bit finer, which I do, it's kind of a rough chop right now. So then I can take and put my hand on the top of the knife, keep the tip on the board, and then I just run my knife through those onions. And that will chop it up just a little bit smaller. For a relish or a salsa, you do want your vegetables, your onions and your peppers and that kind of stuff. You want it fairly fine. You don't want it real chunky unless you're doing a salsa. Some of the salsas have chunkier bits in them, but you want it fairly fine, especially for a relish. Relishes tend to be a little bit finer than salsas too. Okay, so that's our onion. So I'm going to put our onion in our bowl, and then we're going to chop our pepper. Now you can use a red pepper, you can use a yellow pepper. Those are sweeter. Or you can use a green pepper, which isn't quite as sweet, but what happens is all peppers, they start out green, and then as they ripen, they turn to red. So the longer they're on the vine, the sweeter they get. That's why the red peppers are sweeter. So I cut around the stem, and then I'm going to cut it in half. And that way it just breaks apart. I'm going to pull the seeds and the core out. Throw those into my garbage bowl. I always think of my mom when I work with peppers. She always got seeds everywhere. She hated working with peppers because it got seeds everywhere. So you're going to get some seeds, but that's perfectly fine. I take mine, if I'm at home, I take it over to the sink and I bang it. I'm going to bang it on my bowl here and get the little seeds out of the center. And I'm just cutting the ribs out of the center. This is a bell pepper. It has no heat in it. So it's not that I'm removing any of the heat. It's just removing some of that rib in there that we don't need. I'm going to swirl our liquid around a little bit and stir it, make sure it's getting all flavorful. It's starting to cook down. It's getting a little bit syrupy, and that's exactly what we want. So let's chop our red pepper. So I'm going to put it skin side down. I'm going to keep the tip on the board, and I'm just going to slice down through, hanging onto it with my claw. Once I get it sliced, then I'm going to turn it the other direction, make my claw, and then I'm going to chop it across. And this is where you can make a lot of difference on whether you're going to chop it finely or coarsely. You're going to chop it close together if you want it fine. You're going to chop it further apart if you want it more coarse. We want ours fairly fine. Now, if you wanted some heat in this relish, you could certainly use a hot chili. You could use a jalapeno. You could use a poblano pepper. I love poblanos. Poblanos are not quite as spicy, but they have a really good flavor to them. They're the big dark green ones, and they add just a little bit of heat, but not as much as a jalapeno. Okay, we're going to chop up the rest of our bell pepper here. There we go. And turn it and chop it the other direction. If you like really spicy, you could use a jalapeno or serrano pepper. In the handouts that you have online, if you want to get the handouts, there's a handout, I believe it's number 1, has all kinds of recipes in it, but it also has a chart in there of peppers. And so it talks about which peppers are spicier than others, which is important to know. So in general, the bigger the pepper it is, the milder it is. And as you get to the smaller ones, those get more spicy. So if you want it really spicy, you can use a jalapeno or a serrano or a cayenne pepper. And if you want it less spicy, use red bell pepper, or you could use a poblano. All right. I'm going to swirl our liquid again. I don't want it to burn. So I'm going to turn it down just a little bit, let it simmer. All right, the last thing that we're going to need is pears. And so I have 4 ripe pears here. So I'm going to cut the end off. And then I'm going to cut our pear in half. So Justinia's going to bring the camera in here. So I'm going to cut it in half. And we have the inside. The easiest way to do this is to use a melon baller. So I have my melon baller. I'm going to scoop out that little core, and it leaves a nice hollow. It gets all the seeds out. That is a great way to core your pears. Now, my one has a little serrated edge. It's like a little V cut, and I can just take that, and I can take that little end out of there and out of the center, and that takes all of the hard parts out of my pear. So I'm going to do that to my other side. Now, if you don't have a melon baller, you could certainly just use your knife and take that out, or you can use a metal teaspoon to help take that out. But I have found that this is really a quick and easy way to deal with pears. Cut it in half, open it up, scoop it out. And our other half. And you're going to do this to about 4 pears. Pears can be really hard to work with sometimes because it's hard to get them just right in ripeness. They can be really hard, or they can turn really soft in an instant. So to help with that, I bought my pears yesterday, and they were pretty hard. They were pretty rock hard. So last night after I got them, or yesterday afternoon, I put them in a brown paper bag and closed up that bag and left them overnight, and that really helps. So if you have pears that aren't quite ripe yet, you might want to put them in a brown paper bag. I'm going to make one vertical cut here, and then I'm going to slice these up. And chop them the other way. Right. So if any of you are cooking along at home, just continue to work on your pears. Get them sliced up, chopped up. Want them fairly fine. We don't want huge chunks. But it's okay if they're not perfectly little. Get your claw going, keep your tip of your knife on the board, and slice through those pears. They're going to fall apart a little bit. That's perfectly fine. These are going to cook down. Okay, so my liquid has cooked down quite a bit. I'm going to add just a little bit of water to it. I really cooked mine down. Because we want to strain it. We put all those pickling spices in there. So I'm going to take my bowl. I'm going to get a strainer, and I'm going to pour my liquid right through that strainer so that I get out all of those pickling spices. You can see it's quite syrupy. I'm going to use my spoon to get the rest of the spices out there, because we don't want to bite down on a piece of peppercorn. So we want to get those pickling spices out of there. You could also tie them up in cheesecloth, and you could do it that way as well. And then just pull the cheesecloth out.
Hey, Whitney,
Yes,
I got a question in the chat. They want to know what kind of pear you are using.
I'm using Bartlett pears. You really could use any kind of pear. An Anjou pear would be perfectly fine. Any kind of ripe, soft pear. And it doesn't have to be real soft. You are going to cook it quite a bit, so it doesn't have to be extremely ripe, but it does need to be a little bit ripe. I call it firm ripe. So as you squeeze it, it gives just a little bit, but it doesn't have to give a lot. You can use pears that are firmer than you would eat, you know, just as an in-hand pear. It can be a little firmer than that. Okay, so now that I've got my pears in there, it's going to make a little more liquid. I am going to add a little bit more water to this, but my pears are going to start to release their water, and then we want to evaporate that liquid and cook it down into a nice relish. Okay, so as that's cooking, we'll go ahead and we'll finish up with our pears. Pears are slippery, so be careful. Any other questions while we're chopping?
No, I don't think so. But they wish that they had smell-o-vision, and I do too, honestly.
That would be helpful. We need to work on that.
Yes.
I have two of my FC ladies here in the room with me, so they can smell it.
Oh, well, lucky for them. I wish that I was one of them.
I love watching Food Network, but that is a problem with Food Network too. You can't smell it and you can't taste it. You got to make your own.
Yes. Another question. How much ginger did you put in your relish?
I put a half a teaspoon, half of ground ginger. I get questions sometimes too about ginger root and ground ginger. They do have slightly different flavors. Ginger root is in the produce section. Looks like a gray knobby kind of thing. And you just peel the skin off and then you can grate it and use it. They use it a lot in Asian dishes, but it is a little bit of a different flavor than the ground ginger. They come from the same plant, but they do have a little bit of a difference in taste. So if it calls for ground ginger, they're not really interchangeable.
Hey, can you remind everyone one more time about the tip that you shared about the unripe pears?
So we're going to cook this down and it's going to get soft. So if your pears are not perfectly ripe, like you would eat a fresh pear, it might be a little bit harder than what you would eat fresh. That's perfectly fine because we are going to cook it and that's going to soften it a little bit. So if they're a little bit firm, I call them firm ripe. They give just a little bit, but not a lot when you squeeze them with your hand. So you can use slightly, they're basically slightly underripe pears. Oh, and the brown bag. If they're not perfectly ripe, you can put them in a brown paper bag and that will help them to ripen. And it made a difference in mine just even from yesterday about noon, I got my groceries. And from yesterday noon until today, I could notice a difference in my pears. They were a little bit softer and mine are just about ripe. They're firm, but they give just slightly. So did that answer that question?
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, once we get done with all of this chopping, then we're going to start on our pork tenderloin. So that's one thing about salsas and chutneys and relishes. They take a lot of chopping. my coworker, she's a 4-H agent, and she did salsa, canning salsa with her 4-Hers. And by the time they got to the end of that class, those kids did not want to see a knife or any chopping ever again because they were tired of chopping onions and peppers and all that stuff. You could do it in a food processor. I actually like chopping by hand, so I don't mind chopping things. But if you want to do it in a food processor, that certainly is an option. All right. Justini, I'm going to get you to bring the camera in here because I want you to see how much liquid these pears have released into our pot here. And you can just add your pears as you get them chopped. It doesn't have to be all at once, whenever you're ready. But you can see that it's released a lot of liquid down in there. You can smell the peppers. And so you just want to get it coated with all of that liquid down in the bottom. That's a lot of flavor there.
Whitney, another question was, have you ever tried substituting apples for pears in this?
Yes, yes. And in the handout, there are some recipes for an apple relish, apple chutney. So yes, you could definitely use apples instead of pears. And you could use the same recipe with the apples or the pears, either one. Both of those are great fall fruits. Good for Thanksgiving. This is really quite a pretty dish when you get it done. It's a great dish for entertaining. If you have like a ladies' luncheon or something like that, you can use it for that. We're going to put it on a little bit of arugula, but you could use a lot more, like a salad mix, and make it an actual salad with the pork on it if you're having a ladies' luncheon as well.
Yes, well, everybody is saying that your relish looks beautiful, so
Great.
Good, looking good.
Looking yummy.
Oh yeah.
Looking yummy. And I do have it boiling because I want it to evaporate some of that liquid. It's amazing how much liquid the fruit gives off. And so we want to get rid of that, most of that liquid. We're going to cook it for about 30 minutes here, by the way. So while we get our pork and everything ready, it can be simmering, and then it'll be ready when we get our pork done. But we want to evaporate that liquid. So depends on how high you have your heat and how much liquid your pears have in them and how much they release as to how long exactly that's going to take, but it'll take about 30 minutes or so. And if you're ready to serve and it still has a little bit of liquid in it, just use a slotted spoon when you take it out, and that'll work just fine. All right, I'm going to give it another stir here. Get all of those fresh pears that I just added down into that liquid because we want it to coat with that liquid. We want it to get syrupy and turn into a relish. Okay, so I'm going to let that come back up to a boil. So that's our relish. That's everything that we need to do for that. Now, if you're using this as an entertaining recipe, you could certainly make your relish the day before and then just reheat it right before you serve. So it's a great entertaining dish because you can do all that ahead of time. Then you would just get your pork ready on the day of the luncheon and serve it, and you wouldn't have all this chopping and all this kind of stuff to do. And that relish will store in the refrigerator for a couple of days, and it just gets better in flavor with time. So I'm going to clean up. I'm going to get a dish rag here and get rid of some of this stuff, and then we'll start on our pork. All right.
Whitney, I have one more question that popped up while you were cleaning.
Yes.
They were wondering if the relish can be canned.
No, it cannot. And the reason being is that it is not a tested recipe by USDA or the National Center for Home Food Preservation. So when you're canning, you always want to use a tested recipe. So even though this is tested as far as it tastes good, we don't know how the heat is going to penetrate the jar. And so we would need to go with a recipe that's already tested. Now on the National Center for Home Food Preservation, it's a website out of Georgia. They have lots of recipes on there for canning. And so they probably have a pear relish on there. I do have two handouts that are on our website for the retreat. One is on cranberries for the holidays and one is on apples for the holidays. And those are canning recipes. They're extension publications. And so there is an apple chutney in there that you can can. So I would recommend using one of those resources to find a recipe. So make sure you get a tested recipe if you're going to can it. Don't just make it and can it. Good question. Good question. All right. So we're going to use pork tenderloin today. I love pork tenderloin. It's nice and tender. It's easy to work with. So I'm going to get a different cutting board. Here at our office, we have white ones that we use for vegetables and that kind of stuff. And then we have red ones that we use for meat. And so I'm going to cut up my meat on my red cutting board. So there's my pork tenderloin. We're going to deal with that in just a minute. Before I get my hands all porky with raw pork juice on it, I want to get everything ready to go. So the last thing you want to deal with is the pork itself. So we're going to bread our pork. We're going to coat it with chopped pecans. And so we want to get our breading station set up. So the first thing I'm going to do, I do have just some plain vegetable oil and I have a large skillet. And so I'm going to put about 1/4 inch of oil in the bottom of that skillet. So I'm going to go ahead and pour that in. So we're ready to go with that. Okay, and then we're going to set up our breading stations. So we're going to use, I always like to use either pie pans or cake pans for my breading station. So in this pan, I have my nuts. So I have about 1.5 cups or cup, something like that, of finely chopped nuts. Now we're using pecans today, but you could certainly use pistachios. I've done it with pistachios. I've done chicken coated with pistachio, kind of done the same way, and it's really good. So you can use that. If you are allergic to nuts or somebody in your family doesn't like nuts, you could certainly use panko breadcrumbs. So you would do the same procedure. You would just use panko breadcrumbs instead of the nuts as your final coating. One thing that I did learn too, I've developed this recipe years ago, but you cannot use nuts that are too chunky or they will fall off when you go to fry them. So they need to be chopped very finely. So even if you buy the pre-chopped nuts at the grocery store, pour them out onto a cutting board and chop them up a little bit finer. You want very finely chopped nuts. The other thing is that I always toast my nuts before I use them. However, in this recipe, they're going to be fried in this oil over here. And so they're going to get toasted as we cook our pork. So I do not use toasted nuts. They may get too brown if I do that. So I did not pre-toast my nuts. If I'm baking or using nuts in a salad or anything like that, I always toast them a little bit, either in a dry pan or put them in the oven and cook them until I can smell them. Basically, they're going to release their oils and you'll be able to smell them. Okay, so that's about the nuts. Now we're going to do an egg. We need an egg wash. So we're going to take an egg and a little bit of water and we're going to mix that up. So I have 1 egg Gonna break that into my pan. And then I have a little bit of water, or you can use milk, either one, just to thin it out a little bit, about a tablespoon, maybe 2 tablespoons. And then I'm just gonna take a fork and mix that up. In my first breading station, I'm going to put some flour. So I just have plain all-purpose flour. I think there's an amount, I think it says 1/2 cup in your recipe. We're just going to shake some of that out. We can always add more later. We cannot take anything out of these pans after we do our pork because it's going to have raw pork touching it. So actually, even with my nuts, I start with maybe a cup and have extras ready to go. But I start with a cup because I don't want to waste a bunch of nuts. So start with a little bit and then add more if you need it later on. Okay, so I've got my 3 pans for my breading station. You're also going to need some salt and some pepper. So have that ready to go before we do our pork here. All right, I'm going to turn the heat on my oil just a little bit and just start to get it warming up. Okay, so I just have it on low, just starting to get it to heat up a little bit. Okay, pork tenderloin. So a lot of times they come packaged 2 in a package. We're just going to use 1 of those. So pork tenderloin has what is called silver skin on it. So if you see this section right here, that is a tendon that runs along the edge of the pork tenderloin. If we leave that on there, it's going to get very tough and it's going to shrink and it's going to cause the pork tenderloin to curl up. So we need to remove what is called, it's called the silver skin. And so we need to remove that. So to do that, I'm going to take my chef knife and I'm going to go just underneath the silver skin. It's another reason that you need a sharp knife. And then I'm going to pull up and out away from my body, okay? Kind of a dangerous move. We don't want to stab ourselves. You don't want to come towards you and you want your hand on the left-hand side. So underneath the silver skin and out the end. So once you get that, then you can turn it around. Now I'm going to pull up on the silver skin, up and away, and I'm going to angle my knife. Oops. I'm going to angle my knife up so that it cuts right along the back side. I don't want to remove the meat, a lot of the meat. I want to leave my meat on there, but I want to remove that silver skin there. Very important when you're working with pork tenderloin that you get that off of there. Okay, then I look at my pork tenderloin. This one isn't too bad. It's got a little bit of speckling of fat here, but not big chunks of fat. If it has big chunks of fat, I like to remove those. There's a little chunk right here. So I'm just gonna remove that. All right, so now we have a nice clean pork tenderloin. This right here makes a great holiday meal. You could coat that with spices, stick it in the oven and roast it. Would turn out great. It's tender, so it's really great to work with. But we're gonna cut ours into slices and then we're gonna pound those slices out thin. So I'm gonna cut, my end is a little bit thin, so I'm gonna take the end off, but then I'm gonna cut like 1/2 inch slices. all the way down my pork tenderloin. Okay. Now, we want these to be nice and thin because we don't want our nuts to burn before the pork gets done. And so we also want to tenderize it. So to do that, we're going to use a meat mallet and we're going to pound these out. On your meat mallet, you have a pokey end. It has all those little spikes on it, and that's for tenderizing. You make cube steak or that kind of stuff with that pokey end. That will tear apart your pork tenderloin. It's so tender. So we're going to use the flat side of our meat mallet to do this. And we're going to use either wax paper or parchment paper, or you could use saran wrap, plastic wrap. So I'm going to take my little slice of pork, I'm going to put it between those layers of parchment paper. I'm using parchment paper today. And the reason for this, I could just pound it on my board, but then it would splatter meat juice, raw meat juice everywhere on my kitchen, and I don't want to do that. So I want to cover it. It also helps to hold my meat together and keep it from falling apart. So it's going to get a little noisy in here, so I'm going to stop talking. We're going to pound for just a minute. We're going to pound each of these out, and we're going to put them on a paper plate over here. You want to pound until they're about 1/4 of an inch thick. You want these fairly thin. So there is our first one. I'm going to have Jacinia come in and get close-ups of this, and I want to show you a before and an after. So here's our slice. You can see it's about 1/2 inch thick. It's not very big around. I'm going to place it, cover it, and pound it. You want it an even thickness, but you can see when I'm done, oops, there we go. It's very thin. It's just about 1/4 of an inch. You can also do this with chicken breasts. You wouldn't slice them. You'd take your chicken breast, put it between your paper and pound it, and it makes it more tender as well. Not only does it make it an even thickness, but it would make it more tender also. Okay, this is getting pretty well cooked, so I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Most of our liquid is gone. So now I'm just going to simmer it for a little bit while we finish up. Okay. By the way, if you've had a really bad day and you just need to get some aggression out, this is a great way to do it.
Whitney, I know you're pounding out your pork tenderloin, but I had a question in the chat.
Sure.
They were wondering if they could use a larger pork loin instead of a tenderloin in some ranges.
You can use pork loin. It's not quite as tender as the tenderloin, but it would also work. Yes, you could do that. You could also use chicken breast if you wanted to use chicken breast. I like the tenderloin because it's so tender, it's just kind of melt in your mouth when you get it coated with those nuts. Mm-hmm. Okay, here we go. Make sure you get it kind of even. If you don't have a meat mallet, you could use a rolling pin as well. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I think this will be enough to fill my pan here. So I'm gonna sprinkle this with a little salt and pepper. And I think I forgot to put that in your ingredient list, so you might want to add that to your ingredient list. But we want to season it with salt and pepper on both sides.
Whitney, one was wondering if you can use pecan meal instead. And if so, how would you use that?
Yeah, I've never tried it with that. I think it would work because I've fried them with just flour. So I think that would work, but I've not tried it that way. Sprinkling it with a little bit of pepper. It's always best when you do dredging stations like this. A lot of people have you add salt and pepper to the flour, but it's really hard to get the right amount on there in your flour mixture. And so I find it much easier to season the meat and just leave my flour plain. So if I wanted to do some other spices or something like that, I could do that. But I do it directly on the meat rather, as opposed to doing it in the flour mixture. Okay, I'm going to turn my heat up on my oil because I want to get it about medium high. And I'm going to start coating my meat. So I've got a paper plate. Once I get it coated, I'm going to put it on that paper plate. So it goes in the flour first. This gives it kind of a dry coating so your egg is going to stick. And I'll do a couple at a time. I use forks. Some people talk about using wet hand, dry hand. I have a hard time doing that, so I just use forks and coat them. Get it well coated with the egg, drip off the excess. You won't want too much egg going into your nuts there. And then lay it down on the nuts, kind of press it in, get my other one out, shake off the excess, and lay it down in. Press, turn it. And you want to kind of press the nuts in. You'll have to press them a little bit into the surface there. Get them nice and stuck with the egg. Okay, so there's one. Yum. Pull your nuts up on top. Kind of press them into the edges, turn it over. And there's two. Okay, I'm going to do two more, and then we'll start frying them. So flour, egg, and nuts. Make sure that egg covers all that flour, or it's not going to stick. Your nuts won't stick. Okay, nicely coated. Shake your pan if you need to redistribute your nuts. I usually flip them a couple of times and press down hard. All right. So here's our first four. Got two more, but let's go ahead and get these started. So we're going to put them in our pan. Perfect. We want it to sizzle just a little bit, not too much, because if it's too high, it's going to burn the nuts before the pork gets done. So we want it kind of on medium high. Want to bring it in, Jasenia? This is always the glamour shot, you know, when the meat goes into the pan, the frying pan. Okay, and I've got 2 more. If you have a smaller frying pan, you might have to do these in batches. You can just fry them, put them on a wire rack, and put them in a really low oven, about a 200-degree oven, just to keep them warm. And I wouldn't cover them. If you cover them, the nuts are going to get soggy. So just lay it on a rack on a baking sheet. The rack helps to keep it crispy also if you just put it in there. In a baking sheet, the bottom's going to get a little soggy. I do need a few more nuts, so I'm going to add a little bit more. And this is good because, like I say, we don't want to waste, nuts are expensive. We don't want to waste those nuts, so we don't want to get too many in there and then have to throw them all away. I'm going to cook these about 5 to 7 minutes on each side. So, Justine, if you'll start cloning me for about 5 minutes. By the way, I have my coworker, Justine Garcia. She's a program assistant in our office, and she's helping me today. So, all those zoom in shots, she's bringing you in. Okay, I can smell that pork starting to cook. All right, so we're going to cook our pork on each side for about 5 minutes. So while that's cooking, I'm going to go wash my hands because I've been touching all these eggs and pork. I'm going to clean up my area for just a minute. Then I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about relishes and chutneys and salsas. And we're going to talk about some of the handouts that you have. So stay tuned. I'll be right back. All right, it's smelling good in here. I'm going to turn them over. we'll let it continue to cook there. Okay, we're going to show you the chutney or the relish is about done here. So you can see what a beautiful color. It's a great dish for fall because of the yellow and the red and all those pretty colors. You can tell most of the liquid is cooked out of it. The pears are going to be soft and tender. I really like using the red bell pepper because it makes it so pretty when you get all finished. Okay, and I've got them turned, so in about 5 minutes. It got a little dark on that side, but that's okay. So we turn the heat down. All right, now let's talk about chutneys and salsas and relishes. So salsas are really fun. I love using salsas. It's actually the Spanish word for sauce. And so there are all kinds of different salsas. When we think of salsa, we typically think of tomatoes and onions and jalapeno peppers, and that's a typical Mexican salsa. And that's a really good one to use in the summer for chips or dips or use on Mexican food, put it over tacos or burritos or enchiladas. But salsas can have a lot of different ingredients in them, and they can have different flavorings to them. And so I was amazed when I started getting the handout ready for this. I was going through all the recipes that I've used over the years, and I had a lot of salsa recipes. I do a lot of different salsas. I do green ones, I do red ones, but I also do a lot of fruit salsas. And so in your recipe handout, so on the supplemental resources, there's a handout with a big yellow block at the top that you can print out, and it's got all kinds of recipes and information in there. So in the salsas, we have not only the tomatillo salsa, which is use tomatillos, it's a green salsa, and the red tomato salsas. But we also have fire roasted corn salsa. Corn and black beans are a great thing to add to a salsa. You can use it on top of a green salad. You can use it as a dip for chips. You can spoon it over chicken and have kind of has a Mexican flavoring to it, but it's got the black beans and the corn in it. There's also a southern black-eyed pea salsa. Some people know this as Texas caviar. It is a kind of a salad and a dip. I serve it with chips a lot of times, and it's very good. So it's got beans and black-eyed peas in it. It's got the black-eyed peas, which are really good. All right, I'm just making sure that our pork is good. It's looking good here. So it's going to take just a few more minutes. We turn the heat down a little bit there. So the southern black-eyed pea salsa is really good. There are also some fruit salsas in there. So you have a fresh peach salsa. I love peaches. They're really good with chicken. They're really good with pork. And so you have a fresh peach salsa. And then you have a really unusual one that is a peach and watermelon salsa. And I've served that with chips, and it is really good. It sounds very strange, but trust me, give it a try. It's really good. You can also flavor salsas in different ways. And so you have a recipe for a Mediterranean salsa that uses strawberries. And so instead of the typical Mexican flavors, which would be oregano and cumin and chili powder, you would use Italian flavorings or Mediterranean flavorings, which would be basil and cherry peppers and balsamic vinegar. Instead of using a lime juice or a lemon juice or a vinegar, you would use balsamic vinegar, which gives it more of a Mediterranean feel to it. And so you have stuffed chicken with strawberry Mediterranean salsa in that recipe packet. Another one is a glazed chicken with curried cucumber peach salsa. And this is an Indian salsa. So we're going to use curry powder. And with the cucumbers and the peaches, this is a great summertime salsa. Works wonderfully with chicken. You could also use it with seafood. Be really good with seafood as well. So it doesn't always have to be Mexican. It doesn't always have to be hot salsa. You can flavor it the way that you want to. In the handout, most salsas do have some kind of a pepper in them. So it gives you the chart for the peppers. It also talks about the rules for using peppers. So if you're going to use hot peppers like jalapenos or serranos or cayenne peppers, try to wear gloves when you do that, especially if your hands are sensitive to the capsaicin, which is the heat ingredient in the peppers. That can burn skin, and some people are more susceptible to that than others. So, you know, wear gloves if you need to. Also, if you're wearing gloves or if you're using your bare hands, do not touch your eyes or your face. I had a coworker that was helping me with jalapenos. We were making jalapeno poppers, and we were cutting jalapenos in half and taking the seeds out and stuff. And she touched her eyes, up by her eyes, and she was in pain for a little while. So be really careful about that. Keep your hands away when you use those. Always start out with a little bit and add more. You can always add more, but it's really hard to take it out once it's in a salsa. So start out with a little bit. Let the flavors mingle for a little bit. If you taste it right away, the flavors haven't had time to mingle yet. So let it sit for a few minutes, and it will tend to get a little bit hotter as it sits. So those are some of the rules for using the hot peppers. So those are salsas. You also have the relish recipes. Not quite as many of those, but there are some in there. Of course, the most popular relish is a pickle relish. And so we have sweet and dill pickle relishes that we use. But relishes tend to have more vinegar in them. They tend to be finer than a salsa might be, or a chutney might be. They might have bigger chunks in them. Relishes tend to be a little bit finer than that. So we have the recipe that we're doing today. We also have a recipe in there for a zucchini relish that you can put on top of tacos. And that's a really good one. Seafood, I love fish with fruit, either a fruit salsa or a relish. And so there's a pineapple relish with the teriyaki salmon. And that sweet and savory, the salt of the teriyaki glaze, and then the sweet from the pineapple, and then you've got some cilantro in there. It makes a really good flavor combination. And then the last relish that's in there is the apple relish. We talked about using apples in place of pears, and you could substitute apples or pears in either one of these recipes. But with that one, this is actually a recipe that uses bread crostinis, or little pieces of toasted bread. And then it has a blue cheese spread that goes on it. And then you put that apple relish over the top of it, and it makes a little appetizer. So the apple relish and the blue cheese, or if you don't like blue cheese, you can certainly use feta cheese. Makes a really good dip, or you could just use cream cheese as well. But the apple relish really adds something special to that and makes a really good fall appetizer. And then you have a few recipes for chutney. Chutney comes from East India. They tend to have a lot of aromatics in it, like curry powder or cloves, or sometimes cinnamon in it. It is almost always cooked. A salsa can be raw or it can be cooked. Almost all of the chutneys are cooked, and they tend to be a little bit thicker in their consistency. So you have a fresh peach chutney with grilled chicken, which is really good. And then you have pistachio crusted chicken salad. This is where I was talking about you could use pistachios. And this one is done with chicken. You fry those up, you slice that and put it on top of a salad, and then you put a spicy pear chutney on top. So this one has a little bit of heat to it, has red pepper flakes, which are usually cayenne flakes. Okay, our pork is about done. So I'm going to take that off and plate this up and show you what it looks like. And then I'm going to share just a couple more things, and then we'll be done for today. So when you go to serve this, I usually have a plate. And then we're going to take some either arugula, or you can use spinach. I like the arugula. Arugula is a little bit peppery, And this isn't really a salad. You could make it into a salad by using more lettuce. But I'm just going to put like a little bed of the arugula down. And then on top of that, we're going to take a piece of our pork. We're going to lay that right on top. Look at those nice crusty nuts. And then we're going to take our pear relish, and it's just going to go over the center. I don't like to put the relish over the entire piece of pork because it does have liquid in it, and it's going to make the nuts get a little soggy. So you don't want to cover your complete piece of meat. But there you go. We've got a pecan crusted pork tenderloin with a pear relish. Really pretty dish, really good dish for fall. And I can tell you it smells pretty good in here. All right. Just a couple more things before we go here. Let's see, what time is it? Yep. So we're right on time. So a couple of other handouts that I put in there, or a couple of other things I put in there. In the big handout at the end, you have ways to use these chutneys and salsas and relishes. You can use them as dips for chips. You can use them as toppings for nachos or for tacos. You can spoon them over meat like we did today. You can spoon them over a salad. We talked about the corn one. You could spoon that over a salad. The zucchini one, you could also spoon that over the top of a salad and just add a different texture and a different flavor to it. And then chutneys are really good as an appetizer. You take a block of cream cheese, put some chutney over the top of it, and serve it with crackers. And that kind of spicy, not necessarily hot, but just aromatic flavor of the chutney and the fruit all together with the cream cheese just makes a really good appetizer. So lots of ways that you can use these. They aren't just for putting over a piece of meat. You can add them to sour cream to make a dip. You can spread them on sandwiches. You can do all kinds of things with salsas, relishes, and chutneys. I talked about two other handouts that are on the website. This is the one about canning cranberries. So there's a spicy cranberry salsa that is a canning recipe on there, and a cranberry orange chutney, which I always think of cranberries as Thanksgiving and fall. So you might want to check that one out. If you don't want to can it, you can make it up fresh and use it fresh as well. And then the other one is apples for your holiday table. And there's an apple chutney with a canning recipe there on the front of that. And there's some other recipes. There's a harvest time apple relish and a sweet apple relish. And then there's an apple butter recipe in there. So different resources that you can use either for canning, or you can make them fresh and use them up. So any questions about anything we've done today?
We don't have any more questions right now, but everybody is talking about how good it looks and how pretty it is.
Well, it is good. I will tell you, it is good. I've made this lots of times and everybody loves it. I made it the other day for my office, and they really enjoyed it. So I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you for joining me today, and enjoy your lunch. If you cooked along with me, you have lunch ready now. If not, grab yourself a sandwich before we start our next sessions. Which will be the craft sessions, and those start at 1:30. So thank you so much. Good to see everybody.
And we also ask for everybody to stay and not sign out for the next session, because we'll be breaking out for our craft sessions and things like that. So just make sure that you kind of stay on, okay? But hope everybody enjoyed this. It was fun.